is a slideshow. It wasn't the one I wanted to show because I forgot my little flash drive. But this is a slideshow that was put together for our the LRCA's 25th anniversary event 5 years ago. And it's some pictures that I haven't seen in a while. And it's going back to the beginning of the organization, but now there's 127 slides in here. So we're seeing all kinds of things all over the watershed and all kinds of people. A lot of the people in the early pictures were some of the founding members of the group. And now we're seeing some stuff in, this is the middle 90s, one of our Riverfest events. And you probably saw a bunch of pictures from Maslar Park in Archbald in the early part. That's one of our launch points for Riverfest, our canoeathon event. And was it Tom or Ed that had these in our archive? Yeah, this is neat. This is a canoeathon poster from 1996. And before that, the canoeathon actually was started back in 1973 was the first canoeathon, and it was run through the 70s and 80s by a group called the Northeast Pennsylvania Environmental Council. And they sort of were going out of business in the late 1980s when the LRCA was formed, and we took over the event from them in 1987. And so I'm going to talk about a bunch of different things tonight. One of the things I'll be talking about is a new program called the Lackawanna River Conservation Corps, and I have some handouts that I'll get to everybody a little bit later. And I brought some.
While you're looking for that, let me introduce who he is. Okay, Burning Girl, and he's from the Lackawanna
River Conservation Association. Yeah, we used to be the Lackawanna River Corridor Association for our first 28 years, but we decided to change our name last year, even though I still have our membership flyers and everybody's going to get one of them that says Corridor Association. But the important thing is we're still LRCA, and if you could pass those out in.
Sure.
We are a local membership and board-driven conservation organization created by local citizens here in the Lackawanna Valley in 1987 to be the advocate for the Lackawanna River and the Lackawanna River watershed. We have a mission statement that tells people that our mission is to promote the conservation, protection, and appropriate management of the Lackawanna River and its watershed resources. So that includes the river itself, which is right back of the Archbald Borough Building. But that river flows for about 60 miles in its entirety from its headwaters north of Uniondale along the Wayne and Susquehanna County borders. It rises in a multitude of lakes and ponds that you may have heard of. Places like Biddle Lake and Low Lake and Lewis Lake and Lake Ramoby, and that's the West Branch, and that flows down on the west side of Uniondale from Ararat Township. And the East Branch rises in Preston Township over on the Wayne County side of the border, and it rises in places like Independence Pond, Bones Pond, Lake Lorraine, Dunn's Pond, Mountain Mud Pond, and that's the East Branch. And the East Branch of the Lackawanna River confluences with the West Branch of the Lackawanna River just south of Uniondale Borough in what is now Stillwater Lake, in back of the Stillwater Dam, which is a large flood control dam adjacent to Pennsylvania Route 171 between Forest City and Uniondale. And that dam was built in 1960 just above Old Stillwater Dam that was a water company dam. And that old dam was demolished and the water that was stored behind that old dam, there's still some of it there. It's about 5 or 6 feet deep. And the reservoir for the Forest City water supply actually is the flood control dam at Stillwater. So both of those ponds feed into the water treatment plant for Forest City. So that's the upper part of the watershed, and it's all the way up here, and we're all the way down here in number 4. And that, so we said, this is a big watershed. It's 350 square miles of northeastern Pennsylvania in 4 counties. And there's 52 municipalities and school districts and sewer authorities, and 4 county governments, and multitude of jurisdictions from state and federal agencies, the Fish Commission, the Game Commission, different parts of DEP, the Corps of Engineers, Federal Emergency Management and Pennsylvania Emergency Management agencies, and thousands and thousands of people like us, and property owners, and businesses, and property owners that own just little house lots like probably most of us in this room, and other property owners that own whole mountainsides and multiple whole mountainsides. So, and big businesses and small businesses, from the convenient market down at the corner to the pizza shop to Barrett's Pub and the Hilton Hotel in downtown Scranton, the great new hotel up in Carbondale, and bigger businesses like the cogeneration plant and the other big Invenergy plant that's coming in here. Lots of utilities, PP&L, UGI. So all those people and businesses and organizations and municipalities, they all have an interest in our river and our watershed because it's ours. It belongs to all of us. It's the source of our water. It's our drinking water, because all the municipalities in the valley are customers of the Pennsylvania American Water Company, and that company owns reservoirs on the flanks of the valley and out on the North Pocono Plateau, the North Pocono part of our watershed, out near Moscow and Covington and Springbrook and Roaringbrook townships. So it's a huge watershed. All those people are stakeholders. We all have some interest in this watershed. So the purpose of our organization is to try and speak for the river, speak for the watershed, speak for what we believe to be the right thing to do with the river and the watershed, to conserve it, but understand that we all need to use it. We all depend on it. So we're also a consensus builder. We're a partnership creator. We build coalitions. We do the work that we do in the plural. I don't do it. A lot of people say, hey, the river's great, Bernie. They slap me on the back. No, it's not me. We're all doing it. And that's what our organization has been doing for the last 30 years. So as we approached our 30th anniversary, which is next October 5th, and I'll talk about that a little later, we started doing some strategic planning last year. And part of that planning said, how do we really handle this big watershed? We've been focusing a lot of our effort along the river with due cause, because the river really needed our help. From what we could see back in the 1960s and 70s, when some of us were growing up, the river was just too polluted to get near. All of our municipalities dumped their waste into the river. The old terracotta sewer lines under the streets in Archbald ran down the hill and into the river. So when you flushed your toilet up on the hill in Archbald, it ended up down in the Lackawanna River. When we flushed our toilets in Dunmore, it ended up over in Roaringbrook or down in the Lackawanna River. And the same for all the towns. So in the 1960s, the state government really started tapping our local leaders on the shoulder and saying, hey, the coal companies have shut down. There's no more coal mining for any effect in the Lackawanna Valley, because that was the excuse. We're not going to build a sewer treatment plant in Archbald until the Hudson Coal Company stops dumping their waste in it from the Colebrook Colliery up in Carbondale, or from the Gravity Slope Colliery here in Archibald, or from the Marvin Colliery, or whatever coal company. They were the fall guys, so. And they, rightfully so, because they controlled the legislature in many ways for 100 years, back in the late part of the 19th and early 20th centuries. And if you tried to get a water quality regulations through, the coal companies and the steel companies and the railroads were like, well, congressman or representative or senator, you really don't want to do that because you're going to put all of us coal miners out of business. And we're still talking about that, right? I think was a big factor in the recent presidential election. So when we want to do that, we're going to be polluting the river. So by 1960, anthracite coal industry was defunct. We had the Knox mine disaster in 1959. But really, for mining coal under Scranton and Carbondale and Wilkes-Barre, we're in the bottom of a bathtub, basically, in the Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley. It's one big geologic unit from Stillwater Gap and Stillwater Cliffs up above Forest City down to Nanticoke and Tilbury Knob and Council Cup going down the Susquehanna Basin. It's one big valley, even though it has two names. And the Lackawanna Valley up here and the Wyoming Valley down there, but it's really, the geologists would call it the Lackawanna syncline. And a syncline is a dip in folded rock. So the folding of the Appalachian Mountains in northeastern Pennsylvania has been going on for about 700 or 800 million years. And it's sort of like the floor of the Atlantic Ocean is spreading apart. And there's a big rift under the Atlantic Ocean as the tectonic plates of the planet move around. And what that did is sort of start moving the rocks in the mountains here in Pennsylvania. And it's like you walk into a room and you stub your foot on the carpet and you make the carpet go like this. So a crest of that folding of the carpet would be called an anticline, and the trough of it is called a syncline. So basically it's two aspects of wave motion, an anticline and a syncline. So you'll see it in electronics, you'll see it in physics, and you'll see it in geology. So that folding is actually what created the anthracite coal from what would have been bituminous coal, because that extra pressure pushed some of the volatile chemicals out of the coal and carbonized it to make an anthracite. So scan back like 800 million years to the present, 1957, because we're digging coal out of the bottom of our bathtub, we had to run pumps. So all the time we were mining coal in the Lackawanna Valley, we were running pumps. So basically they started mining coal up in Carbondale in 1820, and probably by 1821, Robert Robertson says to Steve Stevenson, hey Steve, you notice all that water around your ankles? Yeah, the mine was filling with water because they were digging underground. And you dig underground, you're going to hit water. So they started running pumps, and they ran pumps with mules running a windlass, and then they started using steam engines. And then in the 1880s, the first major industrial application of electric motor technology in the world for industrial purposes was running pumps in the anthracite collieries in northeastern Pennsylvania. So we got pretty good at pumping water out of the coal mines. But in 1957, you can imagine an economic intersection. The cost of production fed expensively by the cost of electricity to run the pumps intersected with the price per ton of coal on the global market. And at that point, going forward from 1957, you were losing money if you were pumping underneath Scranton, Archibald, or Carbondale. So it didn't make sense. Why would you do that? Why would you want to lose money? Just, oh, well, coal mining is my hobby. You can go along and lose a few bucks. But all the coal companies sort of formed a what I call a tontine, which is a club that the last man standing either gets the crappy end of the stick or gets the pot of gold, whatever the case may be. So the Hudson Coal Company, the Glen Alden Coal Company, the Reading Anthracite, the Penn Anthracite, some of the local smaller outfits, including the Moffett, were all like, okay, well, we're in this together, but if I go out of business, here's the keys to my pump house. You take over my electric bill, you keep my mine dewatered, and you can continue digging coal out of your mine. So one by one, Hudson went out, Glen Alden went out, some of the little guys went out, Penn Anthracite went out. Moffett was still operating, and they woke up one day in 1960 and said, why are we doing this? So they called up the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and they said, we're going to shut our pumps off on November 1st, 1960. And they did that. So over the winter of 1960 and 1961, the mines under Carbondale and Archibald and Oliphant and Scranton and Old Forge and Pittston and Luzerne and Wilkes-Barre and Nanticoke started filling with water. Now, Forest City is up there at, it's a little bit higher than us, right, Frank? You're up there, because you get snow earlier. I always say when I go to Forest City, I'm going up past the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
Right, so Forest City's at an elevation of about, say, about 1,1600 feet. Yeah.
1,550 feet.
Yeah. So down here at Archibald, we're around 1,200 feet, and Scranton, we're about 900 feet, and where the Lackawanna flows into the Susquehanna at Pittston, we're about 600 feet, and then it gets lower down in Nanticoke. So the whole thing is coming down like this. And as the Lackawanna River comes down in elevation from Forest City to Scranton to Old Forge, it intersects where the mines were filling up with water. And there's barrier pillars between the different mining operations. And there's also, I said before, we were in a synclinal valley where the rocks are shaped like this. So from the top of Music Mountain down under the river to the top of the West Mountain, the rock is like this. It's bent, it's curved. Primarily, that's what you see on the surface, and that's what you see manifested in most of the coal measures and the shale and the sandstone. Is that. So that's a result of wave motion of the tectonic movement of the North American plate being pushed by the spreading of the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. But there's other movements that are manifested in the rock, in the geology in this part of Pennsylvania, that are perpendicular at tangential angles to the northeast, southwest axis of the valley. And they form anticlines or crests like this. And so it's like really not so much just like a carpet that you stub your toe on and it just goes da-dup, 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 but it's like a blanket that you're twisting and turning and you got a rough night's sleeping, so you wake up in the morning and it's all twisted and twisted. So subsumed in the pattern of the syncline are anticlinal waves through the coal measures. And the major one that we have is called the Music anticline. And it's manifested up here a little bit in German, right on the German-Archibald border by the Powder Mill Dam. There's a big mine tunnel that comes out there, the German mine tunnel. And you'll see in the river, right by the Powder Mill Dam, there's big orange and red sandstone ledges. So if you're on the Heritage Trail up there, coming down from Delaware Street in German, down to, before you get to the Archibald treatment plant, you'll see where the old Powder Mill Dam was, and you'll see those features in the river. And you'll see them again, because that anticline, it crests in the bottom of the valley at that point, and then it goes down deeply under Archibald and Oliphant, and then it rises gradually again to crest and manifests itself by big orange rock ledges of sandstone in the river in Old Forge. And then it dips down again under Duryea and dissipates down under the famous lost valley of the Susquehanna under Pittston and Wilkes-Barre, where you have a huge fill of glacial material. So those crests of the anticline form two sub-basins in the flooded coal measures under the Lackawanna Valley. And the German mine tunnel is the second largest outfall, and the Old Forge borehole is the largest. And the German mine tunnel was built in sometime around 1900 by the Hudson Coal Company. And it was fed by a pump station about 800 feet under the Catholic Church in German. So right down underneath there, underneath the Rushbrook Creek, 800 feet down, the Hudson Coal Company built an electric motor-operated water pumping station to drain all the mines from German up to Simpson. And the pumps in that pumping station could pump about 40 to 60 million gallons a day out of the mines and into the river. And that was comparatively would be the water supply needs of like Albany and Rochester and Buffalo and Boston and Springfield and a couple other New England cities. So, or a bunch of Pennsylvania cities. So they were pumping a lot of water. Now down below here, the gravity slope outfall comes out down by the Riverside Colliery, right at the Peckville-Archbald border. And there were pumps down there as well. And then there were some gravity-operated outfalls. But down the lower valley, south of Scranton, there were pumps that were operated by Glen Alden and the Pennsylvania Coal Company at various collieries. When they all shut off, Moffett Coal shut them all off, and the whole thing filled with water in the winter of 61, 62. And it started coming out any place there was a borehole or a shaft opening. It was flowing out and causing property damage on the street. And it wasn't so bad because the German tunnel, effectively, even when they shut the pumps off, at least it was an outlet of sufficient size to drain the mines under Carbondale, so they didn't have the problem up there that they had in the lower valley. So below Scranton and Taylor and Old Forge and Moosic and Duryea, anybody that was on the floodplain along the river down there, their basements and their foundations of their homes were getting saturated by the rise of the mine pool water to flow to the surface. So there were a lot of public health and safety problems. So the state had to come in and say, hey, how are we going to solve this problem? Because there was a mine right near the Old Forge Duryea border in the Connell's Patch area, this Sparrowbush slope, that the Pennsylvania Coal Company had up some big pumps on. But that was, the outlet of that was insufficient. And it was a huge pipe that came out of the side of the hill up there and back of the car wash right before you cross the river in the lower part of Old Forge. And it used to gush out of there like Niagara Falls, but it wasn't big enough to drain everything. So the state came in between May and September 1962. They hired contractors to drill a borehole in the sandstone of the riverbed at Old Forge, and it's known as the Old Forge borehole. It's 42 inches in diameter and 107 feet deep, and it goes into the Red Ash number 2 vein. And it, when they drained it with a rotary drill, but the last 6 feet, they used a mandrill. So they drilled the core out, and they did that so they could gradually raise it. It was like the cork in the bottle. And that core of stone from the mandrill core cutter is still laying in the cobble right near where the borehole is in Old Forge. We found it a couple years ago. It's this huge, I thought it was an oil drum, and I thought, oh God, there's an oil drum on the cobblestones. We went out and it's solid rock, and it's got all these chatter marks from the diamond bits of the mandrill cut around it. So that's what we figured out that it was. So what they did is they cut through and they punched through. They were pulling a cork out of a bottle that had hundreds of millions of gallons of water in it, and it was going to come out. And so to gradually manage that flow, they pulled their drill string out along with this huge plug of rock. And in September of 1962, it opened up, and they had a gate valve on it, but I don't think they opened it, but they never closed the gate valve because the whole thing rusted and it's all corroded. And so there's a structure down there and an outlet that's covered with some concrete slab that runs a couple hundred feet along the west bank of the river. And this thing discharges adjacent to the bridge abutment of the Union Street Bridge that goes over to the Connell's Patch neighborhood in Lower Old Forge, right before you cross down into Duryea and Luzerne County. So that thing has been polluting the lower Lackawanna River with about 7,000 pounds of iron oxide every day since 1962. And we wanted to fix it because it's the nastiest piece of pollution that's left on the Lackawanna River. When those mines shut down and they drilled the borehole, like I said before, all of our municipalities didn't have the excuse to blame the coal companies. They had to start building sewer plants. So Scranton built their sewer plant beginning in 1966. And it's interesting. Scranton sewer plant was actually designed in 1940, but it wasn't built till 1966 because the city, like all the boroughs, said, we're not going to build our sewer plant and spend all our money cleaning up our sewage while the coal companies are still doing what they're doing. Scranton's plant was built in 1940 in response to Pennsylvania's Clean Streams Law of 1937. Pennsylvania led the nation in environmental regulation and creating laws that say, hey, we have problems, we need to address them. Even though we had the coal companies and the steel companies, we also had some progressive Republican government that had the tradition of the progressive movement of Teddy Roosevelt and his chief forester, who was later our governor, Gifford Pinchot. So that's a direct result of the influence of Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, and Gifford Pinchot on our mindset in Pennsylvania in the 1930s, that we created the Pennsylvania Clean Streams Law. That law is the template for what eventually became the Federal Clean Water Act in 1972. And here's an interesting presidential anecdote. That arch-conservative president, FDR, vetoed the first Federal Clean Water Act based on the Pennsylvania Clean Streams Law of 1937, passed by Congress in 1938. FDR vetoed it. He had his tail between his legs because he was just been trying to pack the Supreme Court a few years before, and so his legal counsel was saying, Franklin, it's not going to pass muster. There's too many states' rights issues here, so we recommend that you veto it. So how about that? FDR vetoed the first version of the Federal Clean Water Act based on Pennsylvania legislation in 1938. Harry Truman and Congress passed it in 1948. Only it didn't have any teeth. It was a template. It was a model for the other states to look at, to emulate Pennsylvania's process and technology and technique in applying regulation to local level and to different kinds of water pollution problems, and suggesting solutions to them in the legislation. And so Congress and Harry Truman passed it, but it was, again, no enforcement aspects to it. And that didn't finally happen until 1972. So, but Scranton, in response to the 1937 legislation, designed their treatment plant. Gannett Fleming, who's still in existence, a big engineering firm, they've done a lot of work for the Scranton Sewer Authority over the years. They did the designs in 1940. It finally got built in 1966, and then they built the collection system, which is a big pipeline along the riverbank called the Interceptor Sewer, and it's as big as 8 foot in diameter underneath South Washington Avenue. And then as it goes up, there's one branch that goes up Stafford Meadowbrook, another branch that goes up Roybrook, and then the main trunk goes around Steamtown and up through Greenwich and North Scranton. And the pipes get smaller on the way. But that collection system was built between 68 and 72, so the river started getting a lot cleaner. And then the other municipalities in our valley got together and said, well, Archibald might not have the wherewithal to build our own sewer treatment plant, but we're a small scale town, and maybe it makes sense for us to work with Mayfield and German and Carbondale. And then the county commissioners and the state was involved, state representatives, and the old Pennsylvania DER was involved, and they promoted the idea of a coalition of our local municipalities led by our county government that created the Lackawanna River Basin Sewer Authority in 1970, 71, 72. And then they created their plants, and because they were spread out in different areas, they didn't just build one big plant like Scranton was able to do. And by the way, Scranton went in with Dunmore because their pipes are all connected, and in some cases some of the pipes in our upper valley boroughs are connected too. So it made sense to create the upper Lackawanna River Basin Sewer Authority, but then they also had to serve the area down in Moosic. And Old Forge and Taylor decided to go with some of the Luzerne County municipalities at the same time, and they formed the Lower Lackawanna Group. And Clark Summit and South Abington created what's now the Abington Regional Wastewater Authority up there. So these guys all started building sewer plants, and by 1973, the river was clean enough for people to canoe in it and not have to get a tetanus shot. And so it's a little bit of history, I guess. So where are we today? Well, the coal mine shut down in the 1960s. The legacy of that is still impacting the lower Lackawanna River. I don't know if we've seen some of the slides where you see those orange rocks and orange water. Yeah, that's the discharge of the borehole. Now we're back up to the beginning of the slideshow. That's a cleanup we did along River Street in Carbondale a few years back. And that's got a nice fence along it, and the city did a bunch of landscaping since then, but the river was the landscape was in rough shape, and it's a little bit better. And that's probably one of the cleanup projects of Riverfest. Yeah, it's one of the early Riverfests with Scott Lindy and Ray Angeli. And former Secretary Art Davis of the DEP, the second fellow in there. So we've been fortunate. The river was cleaned up to a degree, but we're still dealing with legacy issues. We're still dealing with thousands of acres of abandoned mine lands in our watershed, like the area up along the Meredith Street exit of the Casey Highway, all those huge culm dumps, areas like down in Oliphant and Dixon City where the Eddy Creek dump is, and the old Oliphant Colliery were located, the Marvin Colliery. Some of these properties are being reclaimed. There's other areas where there's huge stripping pits that have been reclaimed by the Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation. But we still have big chunks. The Powderly Creek that comes out of the east side of Carbondale, and as actually part of the Powderly Creek watershed is the silt pond, or it's a pond of water in a couple of stripping pits near Russell Park, where the UFO landed back in 72 or 74. So that's part of the Powderly Creek watershed, and gosh, we got all kinds of interesting things going on in this Lackawanna watershed, huh? Who thought Roswell, New Mexico had all the things on UFOs? I love that UFO pond up there, and there's trout in it too, which is amazing. I think they got there the same way the UFO did. Somebody put them there, but anyway, the lower part of Powderly Creek, there's some silt basins where, and there's some of these silt basins are still out there, where the coal company would dam up the creek or take part of the floodplain along the river and create a big pond, and they'd pump river water, or the creek would fill the pond up, and then they'd pump that water up into the breaker, because by 1900 they stopped using young fellows like Butch back there to pick coal, and they started using the mechanical processes and the hydraulic process of washing coal with Menzies cones and using centrifugal force to separate the rock and the coal. And that created a demand for using water in coal processing. So all these breakers had washeries where they'd be doing this stuff, and they'd pump the water out of the pond up to the top of the breaker, run it through the cones and wash the coal, and that dirty water would go back into the pond, and all the fine particles of silt would settle out to become sediments in these ponds. So up in the Powderly Basin, up by I think they call it the bush, where there used to be an intersection on the Gravity Railroad, there are huge deposits of fine black powdery anthracite silt. And every time there's a gully washer and it rains real heavy and the water in Powderly Creek rises, it washes some of that silt downstream. Now the lower part of that channel was rebuilt by Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation, but they never made the agreements with Casey Costa and Silverbrook to finish the work. Now I'm thinking that they're doing some of the work inside where the mine fire is being dug out up there. I'd like to see them do some additional work to reline that creek channel through there and clean up the silt. So there's a lot of legacy problems like that, like the Old Forge borehole, like the silt basin up in the Powderly, that still need to be addressed. And going forward, we've got some really pretty good sewer treatment plants. The staff at the Scranton Sewer Treatment Plant, the staff at the LRBSA are pretty conscientious people. They're college educated, they're certified, and 99% of the time they're doing a good job. We have problems every time it rains because our sewer systems have combined sewer overflows and they overflow. Now, LRBSA sort of skated under the radar with EPA. They've got a response that they're doing to keep EPA and DEP happy on reducing their combined sewer overflow problem. But Scranton, unfortunately, got in the crosshairs of EPA, and we got in a bit of a jam with the Department of Justice, and maybe it was well that we did, because sometimes it's better to deal with a federal judge than it is a federal bureaucrat. Anyway, we have a consent decree in Scranton, and every time it rains, our sewers overflow, because the pipe going to the sewer treatment plant that I talked about before is only so big. I mean, it's 8 feet in diameter on the South Washington Avenue, but up in North Scranton, it's 3 feet and 2 feet in diameter. And when all the stormwater that comes in, all of our catch basins, how many catch basins do you think we have on the street corners between Forest City and Nanticoke? Huh? If you could count them, there's probably over 100,000. So every one of those inlets, just in Scranton alone, we don't know for sure, we think we might have about 16 to 18,000 catch basins. Nobody has a record of them. So that's something that EPA wants us to do. How many catch basins do we have? If you're going to stop water from getting polluted, shouldn't you know how many catch basins you have? Maybe we should. So, but anyway, when all that water goes into the system every time it rains, that pipe's only so big. So a couple things are going to happen. It's going to get pressurized and it's going to start blowing the sewer plant out down below, or it's going to start backing up into people's basements up above. So the engineering practice, best practices available in the 1950s and 60s, were to allow combined sewer overflows to occur. So there's these CSO junctions where the old terracotta street sewer that's 150 years old under Wayne Street comes down the hill and goes into the pipe that the LRBSA built. And at that junction, there's a flap gate. And on a sunny day, that flap gate's closed, and the water comes down out of the borough's terracotta pipe into the concrete pipe and runs down the river towards Troop to get treated. But when it rains, that pipe gets surcharged. That flap gate opens up, and everything in the pipe flows into the Lackawanna River during the height. If you can think of the rainstorm as a bell curve, so it's a hydrograph. So at a certain point, that pipe gets surcharged, and running to the top of that roller coaster ride till you get halfway down the slope on the downstream side, you're going to have all that stuff flowing into the river. So there's 45 locations. Well, there were. We've eliminated a few on the LRBSA system. We got rid of all the ones in Forest City. There's no more in Forest City. Just one big one, but they managed that down at the treatment plant. So we still have a lot to do. Scranton has 80 of them. So Scranton has a long-term plan with a consent decree that we worked out with the federal court, and we're going to be spending $140 million over the next 25 years in Scranton. So that's a big ticket. So LRBSA has done a better job, and they don't have as many, fortunately, but they still have to spend money. So when you pay your sewer bill, it's going really to help keep the Lackawanna River clean. So it's a good thing. And we're going to be paying a little bit more. And Scranton has a whole bunch of other stuff going on with selling the whole thing to the water company. And then they're going to be responsible because they will become the responsible party of that federal court order. So we still have all that. But then we also have each borough, Oliphant, Archbald, City of Carbondale, City of Scranton, Borough of Dunmore, Old Forge, Clark Summit, South Abington Township, and a couple of the townships in Borough of Moscow. We also have MS4. Oh my God, what's MS4? Anybody know what MS4 is? It's called Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems. So MS4 is catch basins that take rain off the streets and from parking lots or from stormwater detention basins on private developments, industrial developments, or residential subdivisions where you got to manage your stormwater so you don't flood your neighbor out down below. That's called MS4, or Separate Municipal Storm Sewer Systems. Under the Clean Water Act of 1972, all of our municipalities were supposed to address that as well, because if you take Fido for a walk when you get home from work and you don't take a poopy bag with you, and Fido craps on the street or on the lawn, and it rains, and it doesn't go into the combined sewer overflow system, it goes into the separate system, that's going into the river. If you're a cigarette smoker and you cast your butts out, one cigarette butt's not bad, but hundreds of them. Well, fortunately, people don't smoke like they used to. I don't smoke. I give it up. Aren't I a good boy? But man, you get a lot of cigarette butts. We did a fun thing. It was sort of stinky, and we had a cigarette butt collection event down at Courthouse Square a couple years ago. Me and Maureen McGuigan cooked it up. And, you know, I don't think Mrs. Cummings wants us to be spending money on it, so we did it as volunteers. But we picked up a lot of cigarette butts in the gutters and the sidewalks around the courthouse, enough to make these big mountain of cigarette butts. So a lot of things that we do as human critters pollute the world. We pollute the air, we pollute the water in those ways. So one of the things we're doing is saying, hey, let's become more aware of our habits, good and bad, and what can we do about them? So part of what MS4 can do, even though it's like a whole bunch of regulations under the Clean Water Act, it could get us to start thinking about all that stuff a lot more and thinking about creative solutions for it. And those solutions aren't something that we can get an agency to build something for with concrete and pumps and, you know, fill out reports and stuff. Those kind of things are things that we as individual citizens need to be aware of and think about and put into practice ourselves in our homes, in our small businesses, in our communities, in our municipalities. So some of what MS4 requirements are under the Clean Water Act, they weren't being implemented by EPA. Okay, because EPA knew, well, we just got to get them to build sewer plants back in the 1970s and 80s. And that'll be good. And then we'll think about all this other stuff later on. Well, later on came and it was the 1990s, and EPA wasn't doing anything to address some of these other big water quality pollution problems. So some citizens groups and environmental organizations started suing EPA and suing DEPs and different state agencies in federal court. And there were some federal court decisions in the mid-90s, 1994, 95, 96. And then Congress said, well, maybe we better look at what's been going on here. And remember, this was a Newt Gingrich Congress too, which was remarkable. So they tweaked the Clean Water Act a little bit. And then George W. Bush in addition to all the other crazy things he did. His EPA started doing some things to knock on everybody's door and say, hey, we got to start doing something about MS4 in the early 2000s. So the DEP is actually trying to get all the boroughs to start looking at just what I was talking about before. We need to do things like assess everything that we own as a municipality or that institutions in our municipality own. All of our big industrial operations, our commercial operations. We built all these big boxes. We have all these, we're dependent on the automobile. And so we create all these impervious surfaces that cover everything with asphalt and concrete. So we got roads and parking lots and driveways. We got big roofs, big rubber roofs that cover, some of them buildings up in the Valley View Industrial Park, they cover by 5, 6, 8, 10 acres. So when the rain hits that, when the rain hits up on the top of Music Mountain, it can percolate down through the rock and the gravel and become part of the groundwater that feeds our reservoirs, which is why it's important not to build big, stupid factories on top of Music Mountain. And we had that battle back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And now we have the Nature Conservancy up there and some big Game Commission properties up there. But lower down along Casey Highway, we got all that going on. And down here in the older parts of town, we got it going on. So we have all this impervious surface where that raindrop can't percolate into the ground. It's going to run off, and it's going to pick up everything like Fido stuff and the cigarette butts and the McDonald's food wrappers and leaf litter and everything else that's on the street and drippings from our cars. We got, even you don't see it, it's on a molecular level. We're driving our cars all over creation, and all that polluted air is going up out of our tailpipes up into the atmosphere, and it's going to get dispersed. But some of it's heavy. There's some of the molecules and nitrous oxides and sulfur dioxides that they don't float up into the atmosphere. They're hot gases, and maybe they'll get cooled off, and molecule by molecule, they'll start dropping down. So the surfaces of our roads and sidewalks and driveways and parking lots then gets in the interstates, gets covered with that particulate molecular deposition from our air pollution that falls to the ground. So when it rains, all that, everything is getting washed down into the river and downstream into the Susquehanna and downstream into the Chesapeake Bay. So, sometimes it's not the worst thing in the world, but accumulating every day, every time it rains, et cetera, and the more impervious surface you have, the bigger the problems are. So how do we start solving them? One of the ways is looking at the whole pattern of what MS4 regulations can tell us to do, to stop doing the bad things, and here's some smart ways you can respond to that. So we reduce our impervious surface. We don't eliminate it because we need it in certain areas. We need roofs over our heads. But maybe we could turn that impervious roof into a green roof. Maybe we could turn that parking lot that sheds water because it's impervious into one that's pervious. So when we design a new parking lot and we design the curb lines along it, I wish I had gotten in touch with Wegmans maybe 2 years ago. They just rebuilt their parking lot in front of the Wegmans. And they did it the same old dumb way. So they got tree islands, and they actually put irrigation pipe in there for the tree islands so they could water the trees. Well, they're standing proud of the parking lot, and they have this huge impervious parking lot, and it sheds water away from the trees, and it pollutes the water. And those trees are saying, I'm thirsty. And there's only a little bit of soil around me, and so they're going to turn the water on and water the tree. And they're going to pay for that water from the water company. But all that polluted water is rushing off their parking lot down into Storrs Creek and ended up down in the river in Dixie City, carrying pollution, when they could have used it there on site. They could have said, instead of having our parking lots with our curb lines high and our tree islands at the top of the world, we could create basins. And those vegetated areas could be well designed. They could have plants. They could be rain gardens. We could take our landscaping that we're going to do anyway to make our properties look attractive and beautiful and design them thoughtfully to mimic the natural processes that are going on up on Moosic Mountain or along the bank of the river where there's trees and vegetation growing. So, but that's not something that we have written into our zoning ordinances right now. So we need to go back and look at all of our zoning ordinances. And then we need to get our zoning ordinances and adapt them to anticipate how we can more creatively respond to preventing water pollution from separate municipal storm sources. So that's, I guess, one of the other missions going forward that we're working on through the LRCA. And again, I said, it's such a big watershed, we have cut it up into 7 districts. So this is our newest project, and we have a little bit of some of the funding that's supporting me being here, yakking my head off tonight, as coming from our good friends at the Scranton Area Community Foundation. So we got a grant, and we're out proselytizing about this, but we decided that it's such a big watershed that we needed to look at how we're organized socially as communities. And Pennsylvania is very parochial. We have, gosh, how many municipalities in Pennsylvania itself? Like 2,500 boroughs, townships. There's another couple thousand school districts, or several hundred, I think 500 or 600 school districts. And so we, every little area has a border around it. And then we have our little things where we got to talk about stuff that's just Archibald, and we're here and we got to deal with this. But how about what goes beyond Archibald's borders, and what impact does Archibald have on the towns around them? And then what impact do the towns around Archibald have on Archibald? So we need to sort of calculate how we look at our social and governmental and political organizations. And one of the ways we did it, we're looking at some of the boundaries that we already have, and we're also looking at the mountains that divide the different parts of the watershed. So North Pocono area, they got their North Pocono Trojans, I think is that the name of their team up there?
Yeah.
And that's their school district. But it's cut off from the rest of the watershed by the Moosic Mountain. But the water from Roaring Brook and Springbrook and Stafford Meadowbrook, which are 3 critically important watersheds because they supply Elmhurst Reservoir, Lake Scranton, and the Nesbitt and Watrous Reservoir systems. They're the most important water supply areas. So we up here in Archibald, we get water from Elmhurst and Lake Scranton, and it gets pumped up to that big tank up there, and that's what we drink here. So what somebody does in Covington Township could have a very important beneficial impact because they're doing the right thing, or could have an adverse impact because they do the wrong thing, or an accident happens, and that's going to affect everybody between German and Archibald and Old Forge. So that area made sense because it's cut off by the mountains, but we're still linked to it. Scranton and Dunmore, they're tied together by their pipes and by their streets and everything, but I'm hoping that they're going to create a stormwater agency that's going to pick up where the current sewer authority leaves off when they get it sold. The Down Valley, there's a commonality there. They're all tied into the lower Lackawanna system. The Abingtons, they're on the west side of the West Mountain. And parts of the Abingtons actually feed they're part of the water supply for the Scranton and the lower valley through the Chinchilla treatment plant. And Leggett's Creek that comes through the Leggett's Gap, which is the gap in the West Mountain range. And up in Scott, Rushbrook Gap, where Rushbrook comes down from Hart Lake into German. So the Mid-Valley, it seemed like sense to put Valley View and Mid-Valley together, so we call it Mid-Valley View. And then we put Carbondale and Lakeland together, so we call it Carbondale Lakeland. And then the upper watershed is Forest City Headwaters area. So we have these 7 watershed areas. So we're organizing our membership by the areas that they live in. So if there's an issue that comes up, we can mobilize all our members in that area. And we're also looking to form coalitions and alliances with existing organizations. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there's groups here, be they historical groups or hunting and fishing groups or a parish or a Boy Scout organization or even businesses, we want to create a partnership and an association amongst ourselves. So that we can we can call on you guys to say, hey, there's an important issue that we believe is going to positively, beneficially affect the river in the Mid Valley, and we need your support for it. Or there's something that we don't want to necessarily stop, but we want to get them to do the right thing, and we want to exert influence on them. And so that's one way that our Conservation Corps is going to work. And the other is just some of the things we've been doing for the last 30 years, which is whenever we open our mouth, like I've been doing a lot tonight, we're saying something. But if all we do is say something and we don't do anything about it, then we're just wasting time. We're just creating hot air. And I create a lot of hot air, but I also think I got to do something about it. So we organize cleanups. We just did one over the weekend in Scranton. We took a piece of city-owned property that was derelict. The city actually acquired several lots of homes near the Parker Street Bridge because they were getting constantly flooded. And the Corps of Engineers said, well, there's only 6 homes over there and a business and the Parker House Cafe, and it doesn't make economic sense for us to build a flood control levee to protect them and use federal tax dollars for that because they have to meet a cost-benefit ratio, and they didn't meet it. So, but it might make sense for the city to use community development block grant funds or some other funds from PEMA to say, hey folks, if you don't want to get flooded again, we'll make you a bona fide best, market availability offer on your home, and say this, it's a 100-year-old coal miner's house that might be worth $85,000 on a good day. We'll give you the $95,000 for it, and you can put that towards a mortgage on a nice new ranch house somewhere higher up in the community. And so those folks finally did that, and they tore down the homes, and the land is open space. But they didn't do anything else. So the land, the weeds are growing up, and there's 2 dead-end streets that run back into the what's now a little forest. And some Billy Bob's Midnight Auto decided that he was going to dump his tires back there. So we had several piles of tires, and I thought there was about 500. It turned out there was only 368, but we got a big dumpster, and we got a grant also. We looked around and said, how are we going to get rid of these tires? And I've been looking for about 4 or 5 years for money to get rid of those tires. So we finally found it. We created a partnership with the Pennsylvania Environmental Council's Northeast office down in Wilkesboro. And we got a Keep America Beautiful grant for $15,000. And then we worked with Waste Management, and we got 3 big 40-yard containers, the biggest dumpsters you can get. And we filled them, one with tires, and we filled the other one with junk and trash and litter and debris. But we had a little bit extra money on the grant to also do a tire cleanup and then do a beautification project at that site. So we cleared some of the underbrush, some knotweed and other invasive vegetation, and we're still working on it now. We'll be there a couple days this week with a contractor doing some grading work. And there's also an access point to the Lackawanna River right adjacent to this, and these 2 dead-end city streets. So we're going to block the streets off with gates, and the contractor's going to excavate earth and create a trench and a berm to keep dumpers from being able to drive into the interior of the site. And up front, where the road goes in, the first few hundred feet, we got recycled milling material from the paving program in Scranton. So they run the asphalt milling machine, and we got 10 triaxle loads of that milling material, and we're going to spread that out and create a parking apron on either side of this dead-end road so we can accommodate cars to park there. And then we create, using that same material, to create a trail that goes over 200 feet through the woods to the riverbank, and we're cutting a ramp down to the river. There's a gravel bar there, so we can land and retrieve canoes and kayaks there, and people can get in for fishing. and then we're going to landscape it all and get grass growing on the open space, and then eventually we'll get some shrubs and things planted. But we discovered that there are a bunch of shrubs and trees that were part of the landscape of the homes that were demolished. So we've saved them. We got some yew bushes and a big rose bush, and actually a little piece of picket fence at a corner. And one of my volunteers said, "Oh, we don't want to rip the fence down." So she came back the next day, Sunday. She was there yesterday. She scraped it and got some white paint and painted it. So there's a little white picket fence and a rose bush that's all pruned, ready to start growing roses again.
Where is this?
It's at Parker Street in North Scranton. Here's a sketch map of it. I could pass this around. And it's right off of Main Avenue. If you're at the Toyota dealership in Johnson College, the first traffic light you come to, if you make a left turn, you'll cross the railroad tracks in the plot, and then the Parker Street Bridge is a gauntlet bridge. It's one of the bridges in Scranton that's not safe, so they have it shut down to one lane, so you got to wait for a traffic signal to give you the green light to cross it. But as soon as you cross it, you'll see the old Parker House. It's a big old Victorian building with a bar and a cafe in it. And the area between the bridge and the Parker House is where we created the park space. So, and we just did another one earlier 2 years ago at a place called Sweeney's Beach, which is in the Pinebrook neighborhood of Scranton. And this is an area that the city of Scranton owns the land, but they could never access it because there was an old railroad bed along there. And it was the old Greenridge and Diamond branch of the Lackawanna Railroad. So the land was fallow, and it had become a dumping ground and a homeless camp. A lot of the homeless people were camping out there. So we had all these tents and sleeping bags and all kinds of stuff, and they'd camp there for a while, then they'd get drunk and maybe get arrested, and all their stuff was there, and the snow and the rain had caved it in, and it was so there was all these hundreds of tents and sleeping bags and piles of old clothes and stinky, yucky stuff. So we decided that we had to clean it up. So we've been doing cleanups in there for a number of years, but the tracks were still there. It was an abandoned railroad that the Naples brothers from Dunmore had acquired from Conrail back in the early 1980s. But Dominic DeNaples is on the Lackawanna College Board of Directors, and the college bought an adjoining property to create an athletic practice field for their football and soccer teams. And the driveway that goes out from that property at Owl Street is next to the active Northeast Pennsylvania Rail Authority tracks, and it's not safe for the college to use, so the railroad wouldn't let them use that right away. So they had to get another way to get in and out of this property. So since Mr. Naples is on their board, he said, well, we'll tear up the tracks on that property that we own and give the college an easement. And they did that, and then they put down a gravel road. Well, then that opened up the city property that the city couldn't access before. So we said to the city, we want to lease that property so we can make leasehold improvements. And then we partnered with Trout Unlimited and the Conservation District, and we got some funding, and we cleaned it up and cleared it out, and there was a whole bunch of that Japanese bamboo, knotweed, growing everywhere. We leveled that out, dug it out, and buried some of it up in the landfill, deep down so it won't grow again. And then we brought in some topsoil and got a bunch of grass seed donated from the Heritage Authority that got it from a contractor that lost their contract on the big PP&L power line. So we had all these big bags of grass seed. So we got the area growing grass, and one of the neighbors at a business up in Pinebrook decided that he really liked what we were doing. So he comes down every week with a big lawn tractor and mows the grass. So it's a great little park down there, and it's right off of Poplar Street near the Scranton Public Works Yard. If you're at the farmer's market, climb up on the flood control levee, and you're looking right across the river at it on the Pinebrook side of the river. But if you're driving down Wyoming Avenue at Scranton Prep and Bernie Honda, just turn down Poplar Street, and right before you cross the river, there's a driveway that goes in. And we did have a sign up, but somebody stole it, and we're going to be getting a new sign. So we're doing stuff like that up and down. We don't need to do it here in Archibald because we got Manslaughter Park is great. We love that, and we helped to get that developed down there. a little bit a few years ago. We have a conservancy also. The LRCA's partner is the Lackawanna Valley Conservancy, and we own a dozen pieces of property between Pittston and Carbondale along the river, and some of it we've given to the Heritage Authority for the trail, and others are chunks of property that we acquired that are along the trail. So up in German and Archibald, we have the Powder Mill Dam property. It's about 12 acres that we acquired, and you're welcome to check it out. There's an interpretive sign that talks about the old Music Powder Works that were located up there back in the late 19th and early 20th century. So that's the kind of work we're doing up and down the watershed. And I invite y'all to become members and join us, and I'd love to entertain any questions because I think I've talked too much.
Bernie, could you mention something about the local streams, tributaries?
Oh, yeah.
We have Forest City people and Peckville people here.
Yeah. And I brought this stuff and I didn't bring it out yet. One of the things we did back in the 2001, we developed, well, we had originally we developed the Lackawanna River corridor plan back in 1988 and 1989. And then we updated that in between 1999 and 2001, and it's called the Lackawanna River Watershed Conservation Plan. And as part of it, we looked at mine reclamation issues and problems, and I have a map that was developed. Now, the state of Pennsylvania knew we were polluting the river as far back as 1904 because they did a water pollution study. A guy named William Dodge, he was a mining engineer. He did the Dodge report back in June of 1904. And there's a map of the Lackawanna River, and there's a sketch map. It's just a little pencil map. Pass that around for folks to look at. But as part of that was sort of an archival thing that I just had to make a digitized copy of it to get it in the plan document there. But I like playing Lewis and Clark and just going out hiking, and we walked the entire length of the Lackawanna River at different times during that period, and we charted out what we were seeing. And we also walked every big tributary of the Lackawanna River, including White Oak Run and Laurel Run and Aylesworth Creek. So I'll pass these books out, and there's photographs that we took along the creek, some of the wetlands. There's pictures of Edgerton in here, and some of the pictures of White Oak Dam and the Cauley Dam, and the shifting shanties.
Yeah.
So they're there.
40-foot falls?
Yeah, they're probably in there. That's White Oak, so they're in there somewhere. And then this is Aylesworth. And,
It's not there anymore.
did they take the what's up there? Edgerton Dam? That's still up there, isn't it? They didn't take that up yet.
That's it.
Elephant number 2 or elephant number 1 is coming out there. DCNR owns that now, and they're going to be digging that out. I don't know if they've begun removing it yet. We're going to try to salvage the rock from it, so they're going to set it aside. Some of the property over there that's owned by the Slipco, so that rock will be available for landscaping on future sections of the Heritage Trail and other community projects. But yeah, we walked all these creeks, and I got to say that Laurel Run in Archibald has an extremely unique and beautiful feature that I call the Laurel Run, and here's another 50-cent word, the Laurel Run sinuosity. And it's just below the Cauley Dam up there, and Laurel Run, actually, I'll go back, and we talked about the geology before. There's the coal that lies in the bottom of the valley is in a formation called the Llewellyn Formation, and it sits in a deeper formation called the Pocono-Pottsville Conglomerate Formation. And that manifests itself by these big hard white stones, whitish grayish stones, big slabs, and that actually forms almost the crest of the Musican West Mountains. And those rocks have different degrees of hardness. So the Llewellyn sandstones are softer than the Poca conglomerates, which are formed of quartz crystals, and they've been compressed because they're deeper down, but they're eroded out on the ridge lines. So they, every place where you have that geologic boundary, and it's right where the coal outcrops along the flanks of the valley, and a creek crosses that, you're probably going to have a waterfall or other interesting feature. So you can just look at the topographic map and say, figure 1,500 to 1,800 feet elevation on the flank of the valley, and you go to that creek and you look at the isobars on the topographic map and they're coming closer together, you're going to find a waterfall or an interesting feature or a deep ravine with hemlock and rhododendron. And so that's what you got on Laurel Run, this Laurel Run sinuosity, where the water has cut down. And water likes to run. It'll go so far this way until it hits an object that it can't move, and it'll bounce the other way. So that's why water is sinuous when it flows. And it's like that anywhere in the universe that has the physical laws that we got. You'll see it on Mars when the Martian rover and the satellites are looking where they think they used to have water on Mars, and you'll see these sinuous channels. So the water coming down Laurel Run has created this, and it's a deep chasm. It goes down maybe 10, 12 feet. And there's some pools in there, the kids go swimming in it, and it's really an awesome little, beautiful spot. That should be something that the borough puts on its little map of aesthetic values of Archibald. That needs to be protected, and the public needs to know about it, but you all need to create a master plan to protect it and let people know about it, that it's there, because it is beautiful.
It's called the Slips.
The Slips? Okay.
We swim up there.
Yeah. Yeah, it is great. It is really great. So I know there's like local names for stuff, so that's important. Now I know that, the Slips. Okay. So it's a little bit easier to say than sinuosity, too.
It
Really
is.
great. Okay. Get out of here for now. White Oak Run and 40-Foot Falls. Another beautiful spot. Decimated by our friends at PP&L. When they put that power line up there, they clear cut on the ledge above the top of that waterfalls, and it's heartbreaking what they did up there. And I am hoping, in my conversations with PP&L over the last several years, that's one of the catalog of sins that I think they've committed by building this huge Susquehanna-Roseland power line that exports electricity to New York and New Jersey. And one of the reasons that the cogens are coming in here with the gas plants and all. So how do we like turn those lemons that they've left us into lemonade? And I think they Invenergy, the new outfit that's coming in here to Archibald, I want to say to them, and I said it to Energy, and I've been saying it to PP&L, you guys got to fess up. You got to say, we need your help to preserve areas like this. You guys could fund it. You've put impacts on it. You've negatively, adversely affected it. What do we, chop liver? The National Park Service got like $36 million to allow them to cross the Delaware National Recreation Area. We get nothing up here. So I think there's a conversation that has to continue with those organizations that, you know, our organization is going to be leading an effort over the next few years. So that's one of the other things on our agenda for the Conservation Corps. Any other questions?
You talked about the green roofs, which seem to be a good idea for large facilities and stuff.
Yeah.
Toby Hannum has been doing that for quite a number of years, but has anybody, and they got a lot of data, you know, they had some, really been up in the roof a couple of times, seen like how nice this stuff is up there. Is any other industries that you know of attempted to do that?
No, the only one that I know of around here right now, but I think there's a couple others, and I don't have them at the top of my head, but the Scranton Sewer Authority has done one on what used to be their old incinerator building, which has been converted to an office building. They haven't finished the interior fitting, so they don't have their certificate of occupancy, but they did put a green roof on it. So they have these basically plastic canisters, a big mat of them with soil that grows sedums, and it's all the rain that falls on the roof, 80% of it stays up there in the soils. That's the only one. There are a lot of rain gardens. The University of Scranton's new science building, the whole courtyard leading up to it from Monroe Avenue next to the Catlin House is a huge rain garden, and it infiltrates that soil. The foyer and courtyard leading into the Commonwealth Medical College is a rain garden as well. But I think they need to do more. I think we need to look at, and that's where I think with creating a couple, either one big MS4 authority for the valley would help to lead the way, because some of these places don't have the resources to do it themselves under the existing situations. But if we had an agency that it would help facilitate that, then I think we'd see more of it. Yep.
What did you think when they paved the walking trails? Were you...
Personally, I didn't like it. Yeah, I expressed my opinion to the executive director of the Heritage Authority and her staff, and I didn't like it. I think for some ADA reasons it was something that they wanted to do, but I think it was fine the way it was. It actually, it was a pervious surface. It was crushed gravel, and when the water went on it, it drained. It didn't run off. So they created a runoff problem, and they haven't balanced that yet. So there's yeah, and it's, you know, I like to run on gravel. I don't like to run on asphalt. So yeah. So any other comments?
Just one quick question. Along Laurel Run, they had done a reclamation area down from about where the new highway crosses.
Mm-hmm.
And they had lined the creek,
Mhm.
and they prevented it from going into the mines.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the big floods just washed it out completely.
Huh.
Was there any plan of redoing that yet?
I wasn't aware. I haven't been up there in about 10 years. So
That's
we want to notify the Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation.
20 years ago.
Was it?
It was
Yeah.
right after they reclaimed it, they put that rubber liner in, that neoprene liner in it.
Yeah.
It wasn't, that same year, we had a big storm, and we moved another 50 feet over where it used to be.
Wow.
Over 14 ton opens out. It's right there.
Oh, is that above the Casey Highway or below it?
Below.
Below it?
Below.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I remember when they were doing that
Where
work.
it makes the last corner, almost where the greenhouse is.
Okay. Well, they need to go back in there and restore it.
That's
'Cause-
been out there a long time.
yeah. Well,
If you get out there, tonight,
Uh-huh.
you'll see that the creek is running up yonder,
Uh-huh.
and it's not going on in the
No.
river on Wall Street.
Okay, they're gonna need to go back. They don't use big enough rock. I've seen them do a couple jobs like that here, and I tell them you gotta use bigger rock, and they don't nest the big rocks at the top of the work where they start to put that liner in. That's where you need the really big rocks to hold the liner down, and all you need is for the water to get into it, and it'll move big rocks. I mean, I've seen rocks the size of tractors, semi-tractors, get moved by some of the hurricanes that come through.
Fool with Mother Nature.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they took the creek from where it originally was and moved it 40 or 50 feet to the downstream, or down this way.
Wow.
And then after that big storm or whatever, they went right back to where it was,
Yeah.
over there.
Grassy Island did the same thing down at the bottom, where they moved it after it washed out the part of the rose pile there in Jessup, and then they redid it and then it moved back. Racket Brook up behind the Benmar did the same thing. They used big rock there, but they had a big storm And actually, but there was a water line, there was an iron water line that ran through there, and it busted that. And then they redid it, but it's still not, I think if there's another storm, but it actually got into the old engine house foundations up there. There's some of them foundations in the Racket Brook, in back of the Benmar in Carbondale, are the oldest industrial buildings in the valley. They're part of the machine shops in the Gravity Railroad from 1828. And it got into them, it got into those foundations that were filled with rock before. But yeah, they all need to be done. Now they're going to be doing, at some point in the next couple of years, I'm not sure where the funding is, but they're going to do Rushbrook down through German. And they're going to use that same technique. So I just hope they use big enough rock. It's going to be interesting to see. Because actually if they are successful with that, Racket Brook and Carbondale really needs a lot more. I mean, downtown is just waiting to get whacked by a big storm coming down Racket Brook. There's a lot of opportunities to create some detention and use some big rock up there, going up that Linda Drive that goes up into Carbondale Township. And they really we need something. I haven't seen the final drawings for what they're doing on Rushbrook, but I want to get to do that. And that you know, that's another thing that, you know, if you get to anybody here from German, no, but you know, each one of the towns that has interfaces with different environmental projects like that the state is doing, either mine reclamation or flood control, that's what we want to interface with. And I don't have enough time. This is a big watershed, and there's so many projects that I lose it. Yep.
Bernie, what is the length of the river in Archibald?
I don't know exactly. I'm
Find
gonna,
out.
yeah, I can find out. I'm gonna say it's about maybe
2.5?
at least 3.5 to 4 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Archibald's pretty big. I know it's 7 miles through Scranton, and let me just see. I can tell you tomorrow because I got a mileage chart in my office, but I don't have it in my head. So, well, folks, I got one more question.
Do you find the fish safe to eat out of the Lackawanna River?
No, I don't.
Great, because my husband feeds them to me.
Well, where's the catch, though?
So we need life insurance, what you're talking. We need better life insurance.
I wouldn't eat them on a
Thank
regular.
you very much.
I would.
I'm going home now.
I wouldn't eat them on a regular basis. You could. I would say you could eat 1 or 2 a year.
A year.
Yeah, I would.
A year.
Yeah, I wouldn't eat them on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Back in 1994, 95, we did a habitat assessment of the Lackawanna River, and we actually captured some fish, and we flash froze them, and then we got a device called a mass spectrometer. That basically, it's a big gas-fired plasma torch in a chamber, and we got a deli slicer, and we sliced the whole frozen fish carcass like paper thin on the deli slicer, and we took specimens of it and we put it in the mass spectrometer, and we zapped it, and we recorded the gas output, and the spectrometer has an analysis of refractive light that tells us what substances are in there. And there's more PCBs than you want to consume on an annual basis. So,
You got some really
but they're nice. They're nice looking fish. I mean, I
beautiful fish.
I would have a couple a year, but I wouldn't make a steady diet. I wouldn't have them on a monthly basis. 1 or 2 a year won't hurt you.
Yeah.
Because there's all that stuff. It's endemic in the environment around the world anyway.
My
You know?
son comes home with a fish every other day. And he's
Yeah.
like, look what I got, Mom. Dinner tonight.
No, I'm an advocate for catch and release. That way they get bigger and more challenging the next year.
Sicker and sicker.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, we'd like to thank you for coming.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you tonight. Thank you.
Do you have a few minutes?
Sure.